oras na ba? Hi, Raven. Can you hear me? Raven?
Yes, ma'am.
We have like 3 minutes to go before we start. So, klarado ang boses ko, no? Hello, Raven?
Yes po. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you. O, sige. Maya-maya, 3 minutes na. We're also live stream in Manila Times and also in our APCU FB page, official FB page, and in the official FB page of Manila Times too. Yeah.
Great. Raven, okay ang audio?
Okay ba ang audio, Raven? Sir, okay
Yes,
po
sir.
yung audio
Yes.
sa amin.
Okay, thank you.
Opo. Test natin audio. We're waiting as well for Dr. Henry Lim, our reactor. Na-follow up na po yung secretary niya. We're just waiting for him to get into the Zoom. But even then, we will start at exactly 3 p.m. kasi reactor naman po si Dr. Henry. So makahabol man siya. Maya-maya pa naman siya. So okay na. But we already following up on him na pumasok na po sa ating Zoom. Mamaya. Wait lang ha. Ano ba? Okay. Sige lang. We have 2 minutes before we start our forum. Sige lang. Relax na muna po tayo. Raven, kindly take charge of accepting our friends, no? And also my team is also monitoring the accepting of people. Yeah. Sige. 1 minute to go and we'll start. Sir Ding, ikaw po ang opening remarks. At 3 o'clock. Okay, it's 3 o'clock. We will start our forum because it's already 3 o'clock in the afternoon. So, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. We'll officially start the APCU forum for today. So, APCU members and trustees, to our distinguished resource speakers, to our media friends, to our official media partner for this APCU forum, the Manila Times, to our local and foreign friends and colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the APCU forum with the theme Enhancing Understanding and Cooperation Between China and ASEAN Countries under RCEP, Gains, Potential, and Challenges. My name is Malindog-Uy, and I'm the moderator of this forum. As we all know, on January 1, 2022, the world's largest trade deal, the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, or RCEP, came into force. Among the first countries in ASEAN that have ratified RCEP are Brunei, Cambodia, Laos PDR, Singapore, Thailand, and Vietnam. 4 non-ASEAN countries have also ratified RCEP as early as November 2021, namely Australia, New Zealand, China, and Japan. South Korea ratified RCEP in December 2021, and RCEP took effect last February in that country, while Malaysia became the 12th signatory country to implement the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement on March 18, 2022. The ASEAN countries that have not yet ratified RCEP include Indonesia, Myanmar, and the Philippines. Indonesia will accordingly ratify RCEP in the first quarter of this year, while Myanmar sent its instrument of ratification to the ASEAN Secretariat around September of 2021. But Myanmar is part and parcel of RCEP, but given the country's volatile political situation, ASEAN member states have yet to decide on this matter. Moreover, the Philippines has failed to ratify RCEP despite the Department of Trade and Industry and other government agency and other relevant both public and private entities call for senators to ratify RCEP before its implementation. Until now, we are still quite not sure when RCEP will be ratified, and if in any case it will be ratified by the Senate anytime soon. On this note, the forum aims to a greater extent deepen our knowledge and understanding about RCEP. It will explore and to a considerable extent discuss the importance of RCEP to developing countries like the Philippines. The forum will also explore the geopolitical consideration and implication of RCEP and how important the said trade pact to the country's business community. Most of all, the forum will also discuss if RCEP is indeed significant to the aspiration of the Philippines for a quick economic bounce back from the economic devastation brought about by the COVID-19 pandemic. That being said, without further ado, let us start the program of our APCO forum for today. To start with, may I call on the APCO Treasurer, General Fernando Pase, to deliver the opening remarks on behalf of our APCO Chairman, Secretary Raul Lambino. Sir Ding, you have the floor po.
Thank you, Mama Ana. Our Chairman, Secretary Raul Lambino, would not be able to join us because of an equally important undertaking that he is also attending. He, however, sent his message that I'm going to deliver in his behalf. Distinguished resource speakers, guests, and fellow members, good afternoon. At the outset, I'd like to extend a warm welcome to you all. The topic for discussion in today's forum could not have come at a more opportune time. It is about the recently launched Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, RCEP for short, and its impact, including potentials and challenges on the member nations of ASEAN and the big, powerful neighbor to the north, China. Over the past several months, the RCEP has been touted as a historic and ambitious enterprise, one that will shift the center of gravity of the global economy to Asia, and it is easy to understand why. It is a free trade deal among the ASEAN and East Asia's three growth engines, which are China, Japan, and South Korea, plus Australia and New Zealand. Easily, these countries account for almost a third of the world's population and the global GDP. Indeed, the RCEP is the largest trade bloc in history. But how will the RCEP benefit the smaller nations in the ASEAN, the Philippines in particular? Will not the powerhouse economies of East Asia, most especially China, emerge more dominant and more powerful than before the RCEP came into play? The optimistic view is that they will not. According to the Foundation for Economic Freedom, the trading bloc's immediate value lies, and I quote its published statement, in the promise of seamless production networks among members who will be tied to common standards, disciplines on intellectual property, rules of origin, customs processes, e-commerce, and competition policy, unquote. If AF says that the Philippines could aspire to become a regional manufacturing and services hub within what it calls a framework of stable and predictable rules. One particularly encouraging view for the Philippines is that the RCEP is an instrument to attract new foreign investments and also to secure access to cheaper raw materials and intermediate goods for export and local industries. Indeed, the RCEP will enhance trade volumes within the bloc because it will simplify customs and trade procedures among member countries. But membership in the bloc brings with it challenges to the Philippines, as one political and economic analyst has said. For a start, the Philippines will have to build better infrastructure. It will have to do better to cut bureaucratic red tape and improve the ease of doing business. And it will have to invest in labor training and education. In short, the Philippines need to become a modern and competitive economy. How soon it can achieve this is the main challenge. Turning to the bigger picture of the ASEAN countries, the large presence of the three East Asian economic powerhouses might be of special concern to ASEAN within the bloc. For instance, how can trade relationship between China and ASEAN improve and become genuinely mutually beneficial? What is to the good of China might not have the same impact on the smaller economies of ASEAN members. Considering that China is now seen as the workshop of the world, with the made in China label found in almost every major market on earth, how is it possible to see the contours of an enhanced China-ASEAN partnership evolving? We have invited three distinguished speakers to share with us their thoughts on RCEP into this forum. They are Attorney Allan Gepty. He is Assistant Secretary of the Department of Trade and Industries, Industry Development and Trade Policy Group. Dr. Theresa Chong Cariño. She is Senior Research Consultant of the Amity Foundation. And the Reactor is Dr. Henry Lim Bon Liong. He is FFCCCII President, a business and civic leader, CEO of the Sterling Paper Group, and founder of SL Agritech. Our moderators is Professor Anna Malindog-Uy. So without much further ado, welcome to you all, and let's get started. Thank you.
Thank you, APCO Treasurer General Fernando Pase, on behalf of our APCO Chairman Secretary Raul Lambino, for that enlightening opening remarks, sir. Before we introduce our first resource speaker, let me just quickly mention our forum's guidelines. These guidelines will ensure the efficient conduct of our forum today. All participants will be muted except for the speakers and the moderator. Participants may type their questions and comments via the Zoom chat box, and those interested to have copies of the resource speakers' presentations, kindly signify your interest via the Zoom chat box and provide the APCO Secretariat with your name and email address. Definitely, APCO will provide and send the presentation materials of the resource speakers after the forum. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your attention. Moving forward, let me introduce our first resource speaker. Our first resource speaker is currently the Assistant Secretary for Industry, Development, and Trade Policy at the Department of Trade and Industry. His main portfolio is international trade policy and trade negotiations at the bilateral, regional, and multilateral level. Recently, he served as the country's lead trade negotiator in the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, or RCEP, agreement, being considered as the largest free trade deal in the world. He also serves as the country's senior economic official at the ASEAN. Prior to his appointment, he was the commissioner of the Philippine Tariff Commission. He also served as the Deputy Director, the Deputy Director General of the Intellectual Property Office of the Philippines from 2010 to 2017. He is a member of the Supreme Court Subcommittee for the Revision of for the revision of the rules of procedure for intellectual property rights cases. He's a lawyer by profession with diverse experience in the field of international trade, intellectual property, public international law, commercial law, and litigation. He's a graduate of the Advanced Management Program at the Wharton Business School, University of Pennsylvania in the USA. He finished his law degree from the San Beda College, Manila in 1997, and his Master's of Laws degree from the University of Santo Tomas, where he graduated summa cum laude. He also holds a bachelor degree in commerce, major in economics, from the same university where he graduated cum laude in 1992. He's an active member of the Academe, both at the College of Law and the Graduate School of Law of various universities. Ladies and gentlemen, let us welcome ASEC Attorney Allan Gepty for his presentation. Sir Allan, you have the floor po, and good afternoon, sir.
Very much, Ma'am Anna, for that generous introduction. For this particular talk, I prepared a PowerPoint presentation, so please allow me to share my screen. So first, before I start, I would like to, on behalf of the Department of Trade and Industry, I would like to extend our utmost gratitude to the Association for Philippines-China Understanding for this opportunity to, in a way, shed light on the salient features of the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement, and at the same time clarify issues and concerns raised by some stakeholders. For this talk, I have entitled the same to be the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement, an element for economic development. Given that I have only 15 minutes to deliver my insights and also to share the key features of the agreement, I would like to focus on three major submissions. First, economies are highly integrated and interdependent. Thus, the Philippines must expand its participation in the global economy. Second, the RCEP region is critically important to the Philippines. Thus, the benefits of joining RCEP far outweigh the perceived cost. And third, safety nets are in place in the RCEP agreement. Thus, policy space for the Philippines has been maintained in the text and, of course, the agreement in general. Now, on the first submission, which is economies are highly integrated and interdependent, I'd like to stress that in the era of globalization, it is now given that there is an increasing interface of economies across borders. And the advancement of technology has further fueled this integration. Thus, it is a must that the Philippines must take advantage of this development and therefore must expand its participation in the global economy. As they say, economic globalization is an irreversible trend. So in other words, there is no turning back. Interdependence of economies is already well entrenched. Cross-border flow of goods and services has been increasing in the course of time. Market and opportunities have been expanding, and even business models, industries for that matter, have been revolutionized. Now, as far as entering into free trade agreements, it is a common notion that when you enter into a trade agreement, the effect is that you're opening your market, not only for trade, but also for investment and other aspects of services. And the bottom line is that it will fuel economic growth. And in the course of time, since we have embraced the disciplines under the World Trade Organization's agreement, the WTO agreements, it has been shown that indeed countries that are open to international trade tend to grow faster, innovate, improve productivity, and provide higher income and more opportunities to their people. In fact, integrating with the world economy through trade and global value chains helps drive economic growth and reduce poverty locally and globally. And if I'm going to cite examples that have joined WTO agreement and have opened their market for trade and investment, and have experienced phenomenal growth, I can mention China and of course Vietnam. Now, in terms of policy, and this is very important, and I don't want to sound legal on this point, but I see that this is a very important case that I have to share to the public and of course to our attendees this afternoon. As held in the case of Tanyada versus Angara, when our participation in the WTO was questioned, particularly the aspect of constitutionality, the Supreme Court clarified that while the Constitution indeed mandates bias in favor of Filipino goods, services, labor, and enterprises, at the same time, it recognizes the need for business exchange with the rest of the world on the basis of equality and reciprocity, and limits protection of Filipino enterprises only against foreign competition and trade practices that are unfair. In other words, the Constitution did not intend to pursue an isolationist policy. Again, this ruling of the Supreme Court is very important because the common notion is that we have a Constitution that provides a lot of limitation as far as attracting investment is concerned. Now, to go further in the said case, the Supreme Court expounded that the fundamental law encourages industries that are competitive in both domestic and foreign markets, thereby demonstrating a clear policy against a sheltered domestic trade environment, but one in favor of the gradual development of robust industries that can compete with the best in the foreign markets. So what does it tell us? It tells us that it is not our policy to embrace inward or protectionist policies. We have to keep our markets open for trade and investment. Now, what's the value of RCEP from the global standpoint? It has been mentioned earlier that this is the largest free trade bloc. For so many reasons, in terms of GDP, it accounts to around 30%, total trade also almost 30%, global inward FDI or foreign direct investment 33%. And this is very important because this means that 67% of the foreign direct investments are coming from non-RCEP countries. As far as global outward FDI, it accounts to 47%, and of course, market almost 30%. On a more specific indicators, the RCEP region represents 50% of the global manufacturing output, 50% of global automotive output, 70% of electronic products, 26% of GBC trade volume, 35% contribution to global export of electronics and machineries, 60% of GBC for electrical, machinery, petroleum, chemicals, textile, apparel, metal, and transport equipment, and most interestingly, the main GBC hubs of Japan, China, and Korea. And if you are going to compare the performance of the RCEP region with the other with other trading blocs or region with economic integration, such as the EU market, the NAFTA for that matter, it has been shown that the performance of RCEP has been increasing phenomenally through the years, starting 2007, and now it has already surpassed NAFTA and the EU market. So in other words, by its sheer size alone and the extent of economic activities in the region, the Philippines needs to be part of RCEP. We cannot isolate ourselves from this free trade market. And many international organizations have already recognized that the RCEP agreement is a crucial momentum to enhance economic recovery beyond the COVID-19 pandemic. It is also viewed that the agreement could help revive post-COVID economic growth, boost intra-regional trade and investment links at the time of global tensions, and provide a framework for further regional cooperation. Now, the second submission is that the RCEP region is critically important to the Philippines for so many reasons. I will start with the configuration of the agreement. Contrary to the common notion, when you talk about free trade agreement, immediately what comes to mind is market access. You open your market so that you can trade goods with reduced tariff, or zero tariff. But the agreement, as it is titled, is comprehensive. So it covers so many areas and subject matters relating to trade, investment, and economic activities in general. Thus, if you're going to classify the same, you have rules and disciplines that cover goods. Thus, you have chapters that deals on market access, such as tariff liberalization. We have chapter on customs procedures and trade facilitation, chapter on sanitary and phytosanitary measures. We have chapter on standards, technical regulations, and conformity assessment procedure and trade remedies. On services and investment, basically it covers almost all subsectors of services. And we can highlight financial services, telco services, professional services, investments, and even movement of natural persons. There are provisions also and chapters in the agreement that would cover the promotion of small and medium enterprises, economic and technical cooperation, and other emerging issues in trade and investment. And lastly, there are chapters and provisions also intended to enhance the business environment in the region. And this would cover intellectual property protection and enforcement, electronic commerce, competition, and government procurement. So in other words, the RCEP agreement is not only about trade liberalization. It is not only about market access. It is about rules and disciplines in doing business and trade in a bigger free trade area. And I think this is a very important element that we have to keep in mind. Now, let's take a look on the trade performance of the Philippines vis-a-vis RCEP parties. On export, the RCEP region basically represents more than 50% of our export market. Again, that is very substantial. As far as import sourcing is concerned, the RCEP region also represents more than 60% of our import source. So again, our dependence to these RCEP countries cannot be questioned. While it is true that through the years we have been in deficit, one important analysis that we have come out with is that from 2018 to 2020, the imported goods that we source from our trading partners basically are intermediate goods. It accounts to around 60% of our importation. And that tells us that these goods are being used for further production and manufacturing activities. As far as final goods is concerned, meaning goods that are consumed by consumers, these account only to around 15.3%. The rest are either raw materials or capital goods or intermediate goods, which can be used either as final goods or as intermediate goods. Now, on services, it has been noted that through the years, the Philippines performed well in this area because we have been in surplus consistently. And topping the list are business services, manufacturing services, telecommunication, among others. But one thing that I would like to point out in this trend is that starting 2015, there was a substantial increase in manufacturing growth. And this is represented in the slide by the gray line. And you will see the increase in the manufacturing sector. And trying to compare this with the performance of several subsectors under the manufacturing sector, we have noted that the average growth rate in the manufacturing sector is 6%. And again, this is also very important because if you dig deeper, you will know that there are even subsectors where we're hitting double-digit growth. That tells us that we have a robust and emerging manufacturing sector for the last decade. Now, another indicator that is important that supports and bolsters our claim that there is an emerging manufacturing sector in the Philippines is our manufacturing PMI index. Notably, it has always been above 50 points or index for that matter. And last March 2022, we even hit 53.2. So that means that our manufacturing sector is on an expansion mode. How about in the area of investment? As far as FDI is concerned, more than 60% of our FDIs are coming from these RCEP countries. And again, that tells us that we can afford not to be part of this RCEP region because the bulk of our FDIs are coming from these trading partners. And just to show you the trend for the last decade, from 2010 to 2015, Philippines was ranked number 6 in Southeast Asia as far as FDI destination is concerned. But 2016 to 2020, we have noted that Philippines is now ranked number 4. And again, that's another positive sign. And these are the things that we'd like to sustain, the momentum that we have. And we have also noted that domestically, we have adopted and introduced a lot of economic reforms, starting from the amendment of the Retail Trade Liberalization Act, the amendment of the Foreign Investment Act, and the amendment of the Public Service Act. If we are going to complement this with the FTAs that we have formed, including RCEP, of course, then we are ensured that our confidence from our investors will be there and we can accelerate economic recovery in the process. An important question from stakeholders is that what is expected from RCEP? I'll base my answer to the study conducted by economists and experts in the matter. According to Dr. Corralaton, by 2031, poverty incidence will decrease by 3.62%, reduction in poverty gap by 3.49%, and reduction in poverty severity by 3.82%. As far as real GDP is concerned, we expect an increase of 1.93% by 2031. And of course, expect also a boom in construction industry and other related sectors and subsectors. According to another economist, Dr. Francis Kimba, based on his study, it shows that as far as GDP increase is concerned, Philippines is actually hitting 2.02% if it participates in this agreement. Next only to Vietnam, hitting 2.14% real GDP. So again, this is the plus point that we have to anticipate once we become a party to the agreement. Now, not joining RCEP will not result in the status quo. According to Dr. Kimba, trade and investment will be diverted, thus real GDP will decline. And in the case of the Philippines, the expected decline is at negative 0.26. So this means that if we will not participate in RCEP, we will not only experiencing the cost of not joining, but we will also missing the opportunities that this agreement provides. As far as the business sector is concerned, we can summarize also the benefits of the agreement into 4 C's. That RCEP offers cheaper costs, it offers convenience, offers competitiveness, and of course, complementation. And just a brief rundown of the effects of the implementation of the agreement. As mentioned earlier, under the agreement, we have a simplified and unified rules. We have reduced barriers to trade. We have certain procedures that will facilitate also trade. And so therefore, the effect is that it will lessen administrative costs and it will be trade facilitative in the process. As far as complying with certain rules, such as the rules of origin is concerned, it will be more convenient to our exporters because they will just be dealing with one set of rules instead of dealing with several FTAs depending on their export market. Of course, we have enhanced market access that we were able to secure under the agreement. We have also adopted rules and disciplines on e-commerce, which is vital, noting that right now the trend is more on online transaction. We have rules and disciplines that ensure a strong IP regime, particularly on protection and enforcement of intellectual property rights. And of course, more importantly, the implementation of competition policies to ensure a level playing field in the region. More than these benefits that I have mentioned, another big advantage of joining the RCEP agreement is that our stakeholders, manufacturers for that matter, will have access to a wider area for sourcing of raw materials. So in other words, in the case of garments and apparel, they can source raw materials from China, process the product in the Philippines, and export the final product to the RCEP parties. Also, for other products such as canned tuna, you can even source fish even outside the RCEP region. process it here in the Philippines, and export it, say, to the RCEP parties at a preferential arrangement. Thus, looking at all these developments, we can see that the Philippines can position itself as an ideal manufacturing hub in the region. It can also serve as a center for research and development, and even center for education and also capacity building. Just to cite some examples as shown in this slide, for certain products such as leather bags, which are being exported to China at 10 to 20% tariff rate, if manufacturers would locate here in the Philippines, process the product here and export it to China, then these leather bags can be exported to China at 0%. So this is one concrete advantage that manufacturers consider when they locate here in the Philippines. So in sum, you can see a bigger market providing all these benefits that I have discussed earlier. In the process, it will also encourage investments and infrastructure because the stakeholders and also trading partners would like to optimize the implementation of this agreement. The third submission is that, contrary to the concerns expressed by some sectors, there are a lot of safety nets in place in the RCEP agreement. So therefore, our policy space has been maintained. The issue of concern raised against RCEP is that we will be opening our market. We do not have safety nets and that we lack consultation. But I will just give a brief reply to all these issues of concern. Number one, our market is already open. Our market has been liberalized already when we have embraced a lot of free trade agreements, starting from our participation in the WTO agreement, and then ASEAN, and then ASEAN plus one FTAs. Also, just to be clear, in RCEP, the Philippines has only offered basically 33 tariff lines of agricultural products. And the countries that benefit from this offer basically Australia, New Zealand, China, and Korea. Out of these 33 tariff lines, 17 are raw materials, 8 are inputs, and only 8 tariff lines are final goods. Altogether, these 33 tariff lines represent only 1.9% of total agricultural tariff lines. And I hope our farmers, the agricultural sector in general, should take note of the same, because one concern that they have expressed is that we will be opening the market. That is not accurate, because technically under RCEP, as far as agricultural products is concerned, we're only talking of 33 tariff lines, because the other agricultural products have already been liberalized in other FTAs. To be more specific, for Australia and New Zealand, what we have only offered are fish fillet, dried, salted, or in brine, but not smoked. So from 5% in ANSPATA, or the ASEAN, Australia, New Zealand FTA, 5%, it has been reduced to 0% in RCEP, but that will become 0 in year 15 or after 15 years. For frozen mackerel, from 4% in ANSPATA to 3% in RCEP, only 1% reduction. For celery and sausages, from 16% in ANSPATA to 15%, and from 32% in ANSPATA to 23% in RCEP, as far as sausages are concerned. For China, our offers are only for olives, from 5% to 0%. For spinach, 5% to 0% in year 15. Live swine, live chicken, from 30% in ACFTA, ASEAN China, to 20% in RCEP. For animal feeds, from 3% in ASEAN China to 0% in RCEP. And for Korea, for olive oil, it has been reduced from 5% in ASEAN Korea FTA to 0%. For spinach, black pepper, palm nuts, and kernel, from 5% to 0%. By year 15 in RCEP, for frozen mackerel, from 5% in AKFTA to 3% in RCEP. For live swine, live chicken, vegetable preserve in brim or by sulfur dioxide gas cornstarch, from 16, 24, 28, 32% in AKFTA to 15 to 20% in RCEP. So basically, these are the only agricultural tariff lines that have been offered in RCEP that are above what we have offered in our existing FTAs. Now, as far as policy space is concerned, or flexibilities, I can say that there are a lot of provisions that would address any change in circumstances, particularly unforeseen one in the future. We have grace period, flexibilities, we have trade remedies consistent with the WTO, plus RCEP safeguards and residual safeguards. We have provisions for modification of commitments in exceptional circumstances, both in trade in goods and trade in services. And on top of this, we have indicated in our investment reservations a lot of disciplines or rules that we have agreed upon. So this will include reservations or carve-out from prohibition on performance requirement, from national treatment, most favored nation, among others. And of course, we have retained general exceptions, security exceptions, taxation, measures to safeguard balance of payment, among others. I don't have to explain this, but I just want to highlight there are a lot of provisions in the agreement that would cover any unexpected circumstances in the future. In addition to these flexibilities and policy space, we made reservations also on the protection of indigenous knowledge systems and practices of our indigenous peoples. We have also reservations to adapt, maintain, modify, review, or make exception on the provisions of measures relating to exploration, development, and utilization of mineral resources. We have also reservation on measures affecting data and e-commerce, and reservation on measures and mechanisms relating to the local government units, the autonomous regions in the Cordilleras, and the autonomous region in Muslim Mindanao. So we are happy that many sectors have expressed support to Philippine participation in this mega free trade bloc. And of course, we always welcome every opportunity to clarify any issues and concerns raised by certain sectors, particularly from our agricultural sectors. And I hope that with this presentation and our previous presentations also, these issues and concerns have been clarified already. On a final note, I would like to add that we just have to remember that the Philippine economy is already well integrated into the global economy. The extent of integration is not just limited to the agricultural sector. It includes services, investments, and even market. Not joining RCEP will send a wrong signal to our trading partners and investors. Not to mention that the policy direction we want to convey will be consistent with the economic reforms that we have introduced. Maraming salamat po.
Okay, I'm sorry for that. I unmuted myself. Thank you, ASEC. Thank you, ASEC Allan, Attorney Allan Gepty, for that very informative and very enlightening presentation about RCEP and what we benefit from being part of it, hopefully in the coming days. And so moving forward, let me introduce our second speaker. Our second resource speaker is a Singaporean. She taught political science at the De La Salle University and was the founding director of the China Studies program in 1983. She was the founding president of the Philippine Association for Chinese Studies in 1987 and in 1991, and established the Philippine-China Development Resource Center, which promoted people-to-people exchanges. Between 2001 to 2008, she was the director of the Amity Foundation office in Hong Kong. Since 2010, she has been the research consultant and advisor of the Amity. She continues to research and write on sustainable development in China and China's relation with Southeast Asia. Her publications include China and the Overseas Chinese in Southeast Asia, China Big Business in the Philippines, Political Leadership and Change, Toward a Shared Sustainable Future, Religion, Values, Ethics, and Development. Friends and colleagues, let us welcome our second resource speaker, Dr. Theresa Cariño. Ma'am Tess, you may proceed with your presentation, ma'am. Thank you, po.
Thank you. Thank you, APCU, for inviting me to this very important forum. I'm not an expert, I'm not an economist, so I will just be speaking as a layperson on a very important FTA for the whole region, and it will be the biggest bloc, economic bloc, trade bloc in the world. So let me plunge into some remarks. I'd like to base my remarks on geoeconomics and geopolitics more than economics. So what is the significance of, can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am. Very
Okay.
clear po.
Okay, so what's the significance of RCEP? First of all, I think RCEP shows the importance of ASEAN centrality. It was negotiated by ASEAN. RCEP is often labeled inaccurately as China-led. In fact, it's a triumph of ASEAN's middle power diplomacy. The value of a large East Asian trade agreement has long been recognized, but neither China nor Japan, the region's largest economies, were politically acceptable as architects for the project. So the stalemate was resolved in 2012 by an ASEAN brokered deal that included India, Australia, and New Zealand as members and put ASEAN in charge of negotiating the agreement. So without such ASEAN centrality, RCEP might never have been launched. It also means that ASEAN member states will be key players in setting the terms of intra-regional trade as well as global trade in the future. Secondly, I think the RCEP has been celebrated as a victory for open regionalism. Against the backdrop of rising global protectionism and unilateralism, the RCEP, by eliminating tariff and non-tariff barriers, has injected new momentum into open and inclusive cooperation and revitalized multilateralism and free trade globally. It will catalyze investment opportunities in multiple areas, such as tourism, intra-regional trade infrastructure, e-commerce, and digitalization of economies. I think it's important to note that RCEP will contribute towards Northeast Asian economic integration. A spokesman for Japan's Ministry of Foreign Affairs noted last year that negotiations on the trilateral China-South Korea-Japan Free Trade Agreement, which had been stuck for many years, will become active as soon as RCEP is put in place. So as part of the agreement, China will eventually reduce tariffs to 0 on 86% of Japanese goods. Similarly, Japan will eventually cut tariffs to 0 on 88% of Chinese goods. So some analysts think that Japan, China, and South Korea may actually gain far more from this agreement than ASEAN through the new linkages encouraged by RCEP's tariff reductions. It will spur increased trade and innovation, definitely. Sectors where China is looking to engage the ASEAN countries more actively include trade in agricultural commodities and tourism. China is also eyeing to play an active role in promoting digital connectivity in ASEAN. The rise of e-commerce presents an opportunity for SMEs in the Philippines and other countries to participate in e-commerce and hence strengthen SMEs' recovery from the pandemic in 2022 and beyond. RCEP is also the first truly regional free trade agreement whose membership includes China. And thanks to RCEP, its trade with partners is expected to increase from the current 27% to 35%. China is one of the major beneficiaries of RCEP, but its contributions will also be significant. The RCEP will enable China to unleash its mega market potential, and the spillover effect of its economic growth will be fully brought out. Let me say a little about the importance of RCEP to continued economic reform in China. And that's something that people have been worried about. Is it going to open up some more? Is it going to close? So let's look at the role of RCEP. Since RCEP is about trade liberalization, some analysts believe that RCEP encourages more economic reforms in China. Admittedly, countries have been moving to protect their own industries and impose tariffs on foreign competitors in a world where there's now more focus on the costs of globalization. However, new data reveals that China's trade openness is high. Taking tariff rates as an indicator of an economy's openness, there is evidence to show that China is catching up. With a tariff rate of 7.45%, China is just above the open economy average of 6.97%. So, this might be surprising to a lot of people that China is that close to being an open economy, but there are indicators showing it. In a trade openness index to measure how countries restrict trades in goods and services, China scored a 4.3 on the index in 2020, compared with an open economy average of 5.6. In fact, China's tariff rates with trading partners other than the United States have fallen in recent years. In contrast, the average US tariff rate more than doubled to 10% between 2018 and 2020. And you know why. So ironically, China is becoming more open to international trade than the United States and has become one of the more active proponents of globalization. RCEP will help member countries move closer to an open market economy to meet the requirements of joining CPTPP. I think you know that President Xi Jinping has announced that China would like to be a member of the CPTPP, although it has more stringent measures about labor, about intellectual property rights, and so on. But I think the launching of RCEP will be good training ground for economies like China. Now, what are some of the challenges? While RCEP will bring China much closer to ASEAN, there are still difficulties in its relationship with ASEAN member countries. There's still a huge reservoir of distrust of Chinese policies and motivations among Southeast Asian states. China's maritime claims are worrisome to countries that have overlapping claims in the South China Sea. The so-called China debt argument against borrowing has weighed heavily on some of the states. On matters of security, ASEAN member states are not ready to put all their choices in the China basket. They still prefer a US presence in the region, and hedging is seen as an optimal strategy at this time. China may want to exclude other powers, especially the US, from the Southeast Asian theater. But many ASEAN states would prefer a strong and continuing role of the US in the region. So unwillingly entangled in the great power competition around China's BRI and maritime claims on the one hand, and US-led free and open Indo-Pacific on the other, ASEAN member states have felt compelled to reiterate their position that ASEAN does not want to surrender its central role in the region. Rather than being swallowed up by the US or China, it will continue to pursue the role of an honest broker between competing interests. And I think if RCEP can strengthen regional economic integration, this will strengthen the role of ASEAN as a whole. What's important is that with RCEP, ASEAN as a whole will uphold rules-based regional architecture and work for cooperation, peace, stability, and prosperity. You know, no matter what kind of FTAs will be implemented, the environment of peace and stability is essential to their success. So RCEP, I think, has been designed as a living agreement with a built-in agenda for future talks on trade liberalization. I think Attorney Gepty has already showed the flexibility in RCEP. It provides a platform for discussing future trade rules. And as such, RCEP provides a seat for China at the table, and it will have a role to play in shaping the rules. China, I think, will maintain its status as an important global hub and market. In recent years, China has sought to rebalance its economic development, which means that while it further expands its exports, it will also actively expand its imports. That's important for us. Significantly, in 2020, China's imports from RCEP members reached $778 billion, exceeding the country's exports to them of $700 billion. So I mean, the complaint before has always that there is a trade, imbalance. And I think that's beginning to change. Nearly 1/4 of China's total imports during 2020 came from RCEP members. And in the first 11 months of 2021, China's trade with RCEP members topped 10.96 trillion yuan, representing 31% of its total foreign trade value in the same period. So that's how important ASEAN has become for China. Currently, China's emphasis on economic development meets more of ASEAN's demand than the US. An indicator of this is the recently concluded meeting in Anhui between China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi and 4 ASEAN foreign ministers, including from the Philippines, to discuss the Global Development Initiative. So China is always developing these new initiatives that it can cooperate on with ASEAN. In contrast, the US-ASEAN Summit, which was set for March 28 to 29 by the White House, had to be postponed due to lack of interest from ASEAN leaders. RCEP brings openness and competition that can be positive. I think for a lot of small countries, there's still a lot of trepidation of opening up economy to great competition, economic competition. But China's meteoric rise itself has been remarkable and demonstrates the role of openness and competition in spurring economic development. It appears that some countries have managed well their opening of their economies, despite the intensification of competition that accompanies the process. So it means we have to be prepared for competition and not be afraid of it, because that's the only way we can upgrade everything that we're doing and push it forward. An UNCTAD study shows that trade significantly expanded in the last 40 years between 1979 and 2019. In 1979, trade represented 36% of global GDP. But by 2019, the figure has grown to 60%. So this expansion came with changes in the competitive landscape of global trade and the attendant rise of the global south. There are graphs from UNCTAD that capture the meteoric rise of China from the periphery of global trade to the export powerhouse of the world. Interestingly, these charts also show the gradual but steady climb of countries like Mexico to becoming the 11th largest exporter of the world, propelled by, among other things, NAFTA. But the biggest stories are also about smaller countries. In the last 4 decades, Vietnam increased its export by more than 50 times to become the 20th largest exporter of the world. That's quite a big leap. In contrast, whereas the US and Germany maintained their competitive stance, the UK, a historically trading nation, is no longer in the list of the world's top 10 exporters. So changing and emerging trade patterns tell us something about the global economic and political shifts, and we need to watch them very carefully. One final point about RCEP. RCEP is a major key to continued peace and stability in the region. RCEP will be the key to China's continued peaceful rise, since it is included as a major player, rather than it being marginalized or contained. And I think this is very important. Since RCEP includes important players in Southeast Asia, East Asia, as well as the Pacific, the positive psychological impact on Chinese strategic perspectives will be a major contributor to a more peaceful environment in the South China Sea. Secondly, I think we need to note that RCEP members are very open to the participation of India, which is another emerging powerhouse, and even to the US, if it wants to join. Recent conversations between Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern of New Zealand and Lee Hsien Loong in Singapore were about including the US and China in networks that are inclusive, so as to enhance US-China relations. So, to some extent, the stronger that ASEAN becomes, the more leverage it will have as a broker between major powers, great powers like the US and China. And I think that is a very important role that it can play. I think mutually beneficial interregional and intra-regional trade and economic integration will improve mutual understanding and hopefully reduce many of the frictions among ASEAN members. We should recognize the geo-economic and geopolitical importance of ASEAN and RCEP. In many ways, it's playing a similar role to that of the EU. RCEP will not only further intensify the economic integration of the region, but it will increase ASEAN's political and economic leverage globally. And I think it's very important that the members, join RCEP heartily, but also to be very prepared. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Theresa Cariño, for that equally thought-provoking and illuminating presentation. Thank you very much, ma'am. Now let us hear from our reactor. But before that, let me introduce him. Our reactor is a business and civic leader. He specializes in research and development, especially on entrepreneurship and agriculture. He's the chairman and the chief executive officer of the Sterling Paper Group of Companies. He's the founder of SL Agritech Corporation, and he is the current president of the Federation of Filipino-Chinese Chamber of Commerce and Industry, Industry Inc., or FFCCCII. Ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, let us welcome Dr. Henry Lim Bon Leong for his reaction. Sir, you have the floor po.
Thank you so much, Anna. Thank you so much, Of course, a pleasant good afternoon to all of you. It's really a pleasant afternoon today. And I'd like, of course, to acknowledge our guest speakers, Trade Assistant Secretary Allan Gepty, Dr. Theresa Cariño, for the very comprehensive and enlightening talks. And here are some of the points I wish to share regarding RCEP. RCEP is the regional partnership, regional comprehensive economic partnership, free trade agreement between the 10 ASEAN member countries, China, Japan, South Korea, Australia, and New Zealand. It will surely boost the Philippine international trade further. RCEP is considered as one of the largest free trade agreements in the world, covering about 30% of global GDP and 30% of the world's population. It's important to the Philippines as it accounts for a big bulk of Philippine exports and import sources. And this will enhance the Philippines, or Philippines will benefit from RCEP in terms of increased trade and investment. Last year, I was asked what will be the economy for this year. And I make a very big and bold prediction that our GDP will grow from 6.5% to 7.5%. And that was at the height of the pandemic. But I reiterated that if we will come out of the pandemic before the end of the first quarter, I think we could reach at least 6.5% of GDP. But with RCEP coming along, I think maybe you can even hit the high 7.5%. And this is what businessmen are longing for. And one of RCEP's, of course, benefits for the Philippine companies, including our SMEs, which can source raw materials from RCEP trade partners, process the products here, and then export the finished products to RCEP trade partners, including China, at a preferential arrangement. As such, the Philippines could export more manufactured and also agricultural products to the RCEP trade partners. And I was with the ambassador of China yesterday, and the other day also with the trade consul, and I was saying that the Philippines longing to export rice to China, export rice to China, and a lot of people said that, Henry, are you crazy? We are importing rice from Vietnam and Thailand, and you are exporting rice. And I said, I'm not crazy because I consider myself as a farmer who like to wear suits. And among this is what we are teaching the farmers right now to increase the yield with the technology coming from China. And at the same time, we've developed a hybrid rice varieties that is the best tasting rice in the Philippines, probably in the whole world. And we have, for the last 8 years, been exporting this rice to 15 countries across the globe. Of course, all of the Middle East countries are importing rice from us, from Qatar to Dubai, Oman, and all of this. And then we are even exporting to North America, to Canada, to Chicago, to New York. And we are also exporting at one time, we are exporting even to Australia and Singapore. In China, we receive a lot of inquiries from China, especially also from South Korea and also from Japan. While we are importing rice at $400 per metric ton, I'm exporting my rice at $1,200 per metric ton. And that's why I got the green light from NFA and from Department of Agriculture for me to export rice. Because if we are importing rice at $400 and you're exporting at $400, that doesn't add any value. But what we are doing is that we are adding values because we are selling at more than $1,200. And this is what we would like the Philippines to be. Try to come out with something that is unique try to come up with something that is competitive in quality. And this is what we would like to do. And of course, this requires a lot of investment, innovations, and research and development. But then again, because China has very strict restriction on their protocols, especially on quarantine. By the way, I'm also exporting a lot of bananas to China. And I was saying that how come banana has no problems on the quarantine, but for rice, they have a different quarantine standard, and it will take them 2 to 3 years before they can relax the quarantine. They have to send people here to check how you plant the rice, how's the soil condition, whatever, what kind of fertilizers you're using. And they are very strict on this. And at the same time, I hope that with RCEP here, we can also export our rice to Korea, because there are a lot of Koreans here that are eating our rice. And a lot of them are also clamoring for me to export to Korea, because even at that price, it's cheaper than the price in Korea. But then again, you know that Korea has levied a tariff of more than 500% for rice. They want to protect their farmers, and because at 500%, we cannot export to Korea. And even Japan is levying duties of more than 800%. So you see that I hope that with RCEP, they will reduce the tariff, they will try to relax all the rules and make it very easy for countries to import. While we import the cheaper rice from Thailand and Vietnam, we'll export the more fancy and better eating rice to the other countries. And this partnership, of course, we would like to enhance our cooperation in fields such as information technology, healthcare management, energy, contact centers, among others. With regards to COVID-19 pandemic responses, are areas where the Philippines and RCEP countries, especially ASEAN members in China, can strengthen cooperation in strategically, economically vital areas of public health, research and development of vaccines and other medical products. ASEAN and China can work together to enhance medical and health industries, not only for the region, but also for exports to the world. Another thing that we are hoping RCEP is that, only regret is that India did not participate in RCEP, but India joined RCEP, and RCEP will be really a big force to reckon with. With the India population of more than 1 billion, and with India's domestic demands and export, RCEP can really gain a lot. But hopefully, in the future, if we could entice these countries to join us. The significance, of course, of RCEP is also the leadership of China. And of course, RCEP's biggest marker here is China, and its willingness to be part of the free trade agreement with China's growing global economic influence. We look to it as our close partners in developing and upholding trade globalization. Today, China's role has become even more significant in our economic recovery and long-term sustained growth. Being the top trading partner, export market, import supplier, a major source of foreign investment and technologies for the Philippines. Of course, another thing that is bothering the local businessman regarding RCEP and all of this is that when we are opening up the economy, when we are trying to attract foreign direct investment, then there will be a lot of competitions here in the Philippines. Even the local companies will face a lot of competitions from a lot of this foreign direct investment that will be coming through. But then we have already learned our lesson. When Samsung was trying to enter the Philippines, and they're asking for a longer income tax holiday, we only give around 5 years, an additional 2 to 3 years. While Vietnam offered them 25 years. So that's why Samsung went into Vietnam. And Vietnam has become a place where foreign direct investment are cluttering to. So I hope that we can try to adapt and try to attract foreign investment, direct investment, but then the local businessman, we should try also to do our own by trying to adopt innovations and trying to enhance our own capabilities. As I said, at the end of the day, we really, excuse me. At the end of the day, competition will always be there, and we should be ready for that. That's why in our company we eat competition for breakfast. I've been enticing our people that we don't have to be complacent. Competition might be good for us to keep us on our toes, and of course we try to adapt. That we pray for the survival of our competitors, so that one day we'll have a chance to show our superiority. And this is the mindset that we would like to, the local businessman, to adopt. The continued expansions of trade and economic cooperation between the Philippines and China are the fruits of the warmer ties and exchanges between our leaders, President Rodrigo Duterte and President Xi Jinping, leading to the normalization and strong diplomatic ties, even amidst the challenges and uncertainties of the global pandemic. We have to continue strengthening our two countries' relations in the years to come. You can see that my background is the famous Intramuros Binondo Bridge. And I think this will finally become a landmark between Intramuros and Binondo. Intramuros is where the wealthy Spaniards used to reside. Binondo is where the Chinese traders used to reside. And this bridge will connect the two and link the two together. And while the Federation building is there on the side of Binondo, and this will be the landmark, I think, for many, many, many years to come. And of course, this is a gift from China to the Philippines. Other areas of cooperation between the Philippines, ASEAN, and China within the RCEP framework, agricultural technologies and tourism. Agricultural technologies is the hybrid rice seeds that I'm adopting, and I'm helping the farmers try to increase their yield. With the advent of the hybrid rice varieties, we are able to increase the yield of the farmers from 3 to 4 tons to more than 10 tons per hectare. And that will bring down the cost, the manufacturing cost, from 12 pesos down to 5 pesos, and that will make our countries competitive and also self-sufficient. The Federation of Filipino Chinese Chamber of Commerce is also doing its best, trying to enhance and trying to invite the Chinese government how to train Philippines fisher folks to be able for them to catch more fish, to use modern technologies, or maybe even give them some of the best fishing vessels for them to catch fish in the South China Sea or in the West Philippine Seas. And this will enhance the warmer ties between our two countries. And I think the West Philippines is big enough for both countries, fishermen, for them to fish. Of course, we thank China for unselfishly sharing their hybrid rice technologies and other expertise with us in the Philippines and other ASEAN countries. Prospects are indeed promising for the Philippines to become a major food supplier to China in the coming years. Among ASEAN, RCEP is now in force in Brunei, Cambodia, Laos, Singapore, Thailand, Vietnam, and Malaysia. As Secretary Lopez has said several times, we can't afford not to participate in RCEP when our ASEAN neighbors are already reaping the advantages of the agreement with partners. We have seen the efforts of Secretary Lopez and RCEP lead negotiator, Gepty, to convince the Senate to ratify RCEP soonest. It seems, however, that the election has overshadowed this very, very important undertaking. Laws were already passed to amend the Foreign Investment Act, Retail Trade Liberalization Act, and Public Service Act. All these seek to promote trade and investment for the country. At the same time, we are confident that the government has instituted the necessary measures, of course, to protect the affected sectors, such as our farmers, from any downside of RCEP. So let's not lose out our ASEAN neighbors and other competitors in tapping opportunities presented by RCEP, which could help boost our post-pandemic economic growth. Again, a pleasant good afternoon to everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Henry, for that equally instructive presentation as a reactor. To further discuss and tease out the points and ideas and the different perspectives raised by our resource speaker, let us move on to the open forum. Again, ladies and gentlemen, please feel free to write your comments and questions in the Zoom chat box so we can address them as much as we can. At the moment, I have several questions that I've gathered from our friends in different sectors. So let me ask the first question. Based on the list of questions that I have collected. The first one is this, and any one of you can answer the question. So the first question is, China has been ASEAN's largest trading partner for the past 12 years. It is also the Philippines' largest trading partner to date. How important is the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, or RCEP, to ASEAN-China economic and trade ties and Philippine-China trade and economic cooperation? I think this had been discussed earlier by the different speaker, but I think what the question is pointing out is more emphasis on the how important is RCEP to ASEAN-China economic and trade ties and Philippine-China trade and economic cooperation. So we'll ask ASEC Gepty first, I think, and then we'll go to Dr. Cariño and then Dr. Henry. Sir?
Mahana, for that question. That's a very important one because the question highlights the fact that China is one of the largest trading partners, not only of ASEAN, but the Philippines. Now, we have to take into account that under this FTA, one big advantage is not just the market access. Because one argument that they would always say is that, what's the need for RCEP when you have already the ASEAN-China FTA? So in other words, you have an FTA with China. But they don't see the bigger advantage of having a mega free trade bloc. And one advantage is the fact that you have wider sourcing of raw materials for purposes of conferring origin for the product to enjoy preferential treatment. To illustrate, for example, if you are just working on an ASEAN-China FTA, then for purposes of securing your raw materials, for example, then you're just limited to the 10 ASEAN member states and China, so that your product, raw materials, can be conferred originating status. But with RCEP, with these 15 countries or 15 parties, so definitely you can source all your materials from these 15 RCEP parties and export it to the RCEP parties also under a preferential arrangement. And for the manufacturer, that's a big advantage already. Now, in addition to this, one additional consideration is the fact that you have enhanced your market access. So in other words, there is an improvement. Okay, so if you have liberalized your tariff, for example, under ASEAN-China, there are certain products in RCEP that you were able to secure better concession. So that's good also for manufacturer of that particular product. Another point is that we have simplified the rules. And I think the fact that we have simplified the rules means that it is trade facilitative. If it is trade facilitative, then that means less administrative costs on the part of exporter and even importer. So it's easier for them to trade between across different borders within ASEAN. And of course, I'd like to highlight also that in RCEP, we're not just talking here about market access. We're talking here of rules and disciplines. One, for example, one important chapter is the e-commerce. We have intensified our activities via online platform. E-commerce has been phenomenally increasing. We need rules. We need discipline. How do we trade? How do we transact via online? How do we ensure that consumers are protected within the free trade area? How do we ensure that we are dealing with reputable businesses within the free trade area? And the RCEP chapter on e-commerce would help address that. So there are so many advantages, and I think the time is limited. I can talk for so many minutes on that, but I have highlighted these very important advantages that our general public and stakeholders should take note of.
Thank you, ASEC Gepty. Dr. Theresa, do you want to chime in a little of your perspective?
Well, I think Attorney Gepty has said a lot already.
Yes.
Um,
Yes.
But I think from my perspective, I think we need to encourage Filipinos to explore the Chinese market more. I mean, I go to China almost every year, but I see a lot of Thai products, agricultural products, mangoes, durians, all kinds of fruits and so on. But very little of Filipino products, agricultural products, And I think there are a lot of areas where the Philippines can export to China because there's a changing market. There's a growing middle class, and their tastes have become more international. I read a story about an Afghan entrepreneur who's now bringing Afghan carpets to China. And he has a lot of customers. This would not have happened, say, 10, 20 years ago. But now I think their tastes have become more sophisticated. They like diversity and so on. So I think it's worth to send more delegations to explore the China market. And don't just stick to the south. You go to the other parts on the coastal areas, which are developed. And each region has its own taste and different way of development. So it's a huge country. We have nothing to lose. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Dr. Henry, any
Yes, Anna. Of course, ASEC Gepty and of course Dr. Theresa Cariño has already expounded on this, but I guess looking at the perspective from an entrepreneur, this what you call RCEP is one further enhanced the ASEAN +3 or +4 or whatever, because of the duties that will be lowered. That's a big difference. In fact, just a lowering of 1 or 2% will really have a big chunk of encouragement to people of countries trying to import products. The Philippines, I'm exporting a lot of bananas to China. In fact, it's an open PO, and they have also asked that if we could also export our frozen tiger prawns or whatever to them. They need 1,000 containers, at least for 1 year, or even up to 10,000 containers, also an open PO, but I don't think we could serve them. So there is a lot of opportunities for us, especially with RCEP. And I think we should explore these opportunities. Fish, we have a lot of shorelines that we can put fish cages that we could try to grow prawns, whatever kind of streams or whatever. But we are not doing it. So hopefully, with RCEP, people will start to invest again. But then again, we would like to keep RCEP as an harmonious relationship, because we've seen that any countries that has any trade war will really lead to a lot of hardship, also for the farmers. I still remember, China, in spite that they are sufficient in rice or whatever, but China imported a lot of soya because at one time, many, many years ago, America export soya to China at a very, very low price that no Chinese farmers would try to grow soya anymore. They'll lose money. So China has been depending on America for the soya requirements. You know that China need a lot of soya now, not only for the bean or bean curds or whatever, cocoa, but also for the feeds and other livestock. So China is buying a lot of soya. But then when the trade war begins, China suddenly stopped importing soya from America. If China stopped buying soya from America, the American farmers, soya farmers, are complaining. You can see the huge pile of soya that cannot be sold in America, that has been rotten or whatever. So these are the things that we should watch out for any trade war. A trade war should not be conducted because it will actually affect both countries. Just like one time in Taiwan, when we have our, I think our Coast Guard or whatever, shoot one of the Taiwan fishermen, and I think the Taiwan fisherman was killed or whatever. There have been sanctions on Philippines, and they stopped, of course, trying to hire our OFWs. In fact, some of the OFWs, when the contract was already full, they have to send them back here. But then what happened? When all the OFWs were sent back to the Philippines, Taiwan cannot meet the export demand. The export has to be canceled because they have no people working in the factories. So what happened? They have to open up again and hire again back our OFW. So, trade wars and all of this really does not affect only one country. It's both countries now. All our OFWs can still raise, maybe they have 2 hectares land there that they can go back and plant rice, whatever. But the Taiwanese factories now, they cannot afford not to have enough workers working in the factory. So a lot of things will happen, and I hope that countries really realize that there will be no more trade wars, that there will be harmonious relationship among countries. And this RCEP will really be the one that will enhance a lot of opportunities and harmonious relations. And I hope our Senate try to ratify it as soon as possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Henry. Another question I think is much more about possibly asking your perspective and suggestion, because as you've discussed, the three of you, I think the word, one of the important concept is the so-called competitiveness and competition, or healthy competition among members of RCEP. So now the question is, what are the ways forward for the Philippines to be more competitive and emerge victorious within the RCEP framework? So this is the question. So we'll go again. We'll ask Attorney Gepty first, and then Dr. Cariño, and then Dr. Henry. So this is much more suggestion, or possibly, looking at the country, how can we be more competitive? Because more people is afraid to compete, I think. So that's much more the essence of the question, Prof.
Thank you, Ma'am Anang. First of all, we have to face the reality that we are already in a globalized world. Economies are highly integrated. They are, of course, dependent with each other. And with the advancement of technology, we see that there's always competition. And one important point is that while there is competition, we have to know how to figure out and determine our comparative advantage and focus on that. So in other words, with the integrated economies in the world right now, such as the global value chain, for example, if I can be very precise about it, basically, that's the core of the modern global economy. So since countries are interdependent, then we cannot say that one product is made in America or made in China or made in the Philippines. Because with a globalized world, one country would produce one component of a particular product. Another component of that product will be produced in another country. It will be assembled in another country, manufactured in another country, by sometimes companies also owned by other economies or countries for that matter. So you see the integration under the global value chain. So it is the supply chain in itself that would, in a way, address all these concerns. So for a country like the Philippines, you really have to focus on your comparative advantage. You cannot afford to compete in every subsector or sector. You have to find your niche in the process. So for example, the Philippines is very strong in electronic products. So maybe one policy consideration is to optimize your strength in electronic products. More than producing components of electronic products, you may want to resort also manufacturing final or high value technology products. And if I may share also, one indicator that I have noticed in recent years is the manufacturing of strategic goods. When I say strategic goods, these are products that are subject to dual use. So in other words, for commercial purposes and also for military purposes. And these products are highly regulated. Last year, the revenues generated from the export of these strategic goods was only around $3.6 million. And in the span of 1 year, the Philippines generated $4.5 billion. So you would see the phenomenal increase in revenues generated. And that tells us that the Philippines is one strategic location for manufacturing of strategic goods. So I think that's one comparative advantage that we have to consider. Philippines is very strong on education, so we can focus on that. Training, research and development, among others, and of course, not to mention innovation. So I think that's the key, Anna. We really have to find our niche and compete in the globalized world. Thank you.
Yes. Yes, I agree. So it's comparative advantage and finding the niche of the Philippines in the frame, the ASEAN framework. Ma'am Theresa po?
Yeah, I think in dealing with the Chinese market, one of the disadvantages of Filipino way of production is that it's not large scale. You know, when you visit China, the thing that really strikes you most is the scale of the country, the people, but also the scale of production. And because the Chinese are very price sensitive, unless you have adequate scale, you won't be able to meet the competitive prices of other ASEAN countries, for instance, you know. Because I think I'm thinking of the SMEs. They're very small and it's very hard for them to compete. And I think this is something that the government needs to think about in strategizing for the economy, is how to enable SMEs to scale up their production. I had a friend who was running a factory producing coconut products. But when they had an order from Taiwan, they couldn't meet the order. They didn't have the scale. And I think this is a big hampering point. You know, it hampers marketing and competitiveness. I mean, this is just a layperson's observation. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. So it's from Dr. Cariño, it's more on, I think, ma'am, what you're saying is state support, especially for SMEs, for them to be able to compete internationally and within the RCEP framework, the moment the Philippines become part of RCEP, and hopefully soon. And Dr. Henry po?
Yes, thank you, Anna. As Gepty has said, and also Theresa has said also regarding competitive advantage and how that we could be competitive. Of course, as a businessman, as an entrepreneur, looking at it from another perspective, you should know that the Chinese are very skilled businessmen. And the reason why there are a lot of big Chinese businessmen in the Philippines right now is that I think we should thank President Magsaysay for his retail act before. Because during that time in the 50s, most sari-sari stores are owned by the Chinese businessmen. and they overshadow the Philippines sari-sari store in such a way that I think that time they said that, you know, for Chinese, you cannot operate retail stores. You have to go wholesale or either factory or whatever. So that drives a lot of Chinese now to open up factories and whatever. Look at the Chinese, the local Chinese right now. They own a lot of big factories, the biggest steel mills, the biggest whatever are owned by the Chinese. So there is no reason of trying to suppress one sector, because if you suppress it one, maybe you create another opportunities for them. And that's why I said we should. The reason why we used to own a small bookstore before, but because of this retail app, we cannot operate the bookstores. We have to go into manufacturing, notebooks, whatever. So this is what happened. And another thing is that for the Philippines, we should look at our comparative advantage. You know what's our comparative advantage right now? It's our literacy rate. It's our people who can speak English. I think almost 80% of our people can speak very good English. Even the children in the streets, you can converse with them in English also. So this is our comparative advantage. And do you know that our OFWs is our blessing to us, that if ever we do not have OFW, I'll tell you maybe 60 or 70% of the foreign vessels or the big tankers cannot operate. Maybe even 30 to 40% of the big hospitals in America and Canada cannot operate also. There are a lot of other things can operate because all of them are relying on Philippines manpower. The Philippines has the biggest OFWs and has the best OFW the world ever knows. And these are the things that we have to do. And also in order for us to have more people working here rather than working abroad, is that we should really enhance our tourism industries. Our tourism industries can really also employ a lot of people for this one. And I'm happy that we also only have around 2 or 3 million tourists now. I think right now we have around 7, 8 million, 9 million. But then we should know that 7 or 8 million is the total tourists already. But just for the Chinese alone, I think Thailand has 11 or 12 million Chinese tourists alone. So we still have a lot of things for us to catch up. So there will be a lot of big opportunities for us. And we have a lot of comparative advantage that we could try to do what we are doing. And I'm sure that's why they are saying that we incur a lot of debts, whatever, because of the pandemic, because we are buying a lot of this, all of these vaccines and whatever. But I'm not a bit worried. I think we can get out of this mess. As we have a good leader in the next administration, we can come up with flying colors. I'm not a bit worried, and I'm always very optimistic for our countries. And with that, Anna, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Henry. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Okay, I have 2 last questions before we move on to the last part of our program. And one from our audience at this time. Ito yung sabi po niya. At this point, it seems it is better to remain in the status quo in dealing with China. Best is to develop more bilateral relation with China, invite mutually beneficial infrastructure development, and build manufacturing and production companies. My question is, what do you think would be the biggest setback for not joining RCEP for the time being if we don't join, knowing Philippines can still trade with China and ASEAN? So what's the biggest setback for not joining RCEP? I think that's the essence of the question. Yes, Asik Gepty.
I think I would say that it would be very catastrophic for the Philippines not to join RCEP for so many reasons. Number one is that, as explained earlier, by the sheer size alone of the RCEP region and the extent of economic activities happening in this region, Philippines cannot afford not to be part of this mega free trade deal. You can just imagine that your export market basically is the RCEP party, are the RCEP parties. And as far as sourcing your imported products, the bulk also of your imported goods are coming from the RCEP parties. And if you are talking about manufacturing sector, then vis-a-vis other ASEAN member states, then the Philippines will be shortchanged because your competitors in ASEAN will have access to this wider sourcing of raw materials. And your manufacturer here in the Philippines will not have that advantage. Also, in terms of market access, you will be affected or shortchanged. I will give a particular example. Preserved pineapples, which is one product where in Philippines has a comparative advantage. If you look at the Chinese market, basically among ASEAN member states, you can say that Thailand is one of the top ASEAN countries exporting preserved pineapples in ASEAN. Next to that is the Philippines, and followed by Indonesia. Of course, I would say with a very narrow distance. So under RCEP, we were able to secure a preferential arrangement. From 5%, it will now become 0 in RCEP. So if you will not join RCEP, what will happen? The exporters, the producers in Indonesia will be enjoying the preferential arrangement of 0% in China. And your exporter here in the Philippines, when they export their products in China, it will be imposed 5%. So who has the comparative advantage in that particular situation? I think the answer is obvious. Another point is that it gives a wrong signal to our trading partners and investors. Not to mention that it is not synced also to the economic reforms that we have introduced. One concrete example is that recently we have introduced, I would say, substantial economic reforms. We've amended the Public Service Act, basically by delineating what are public utilities vis-a-vis public services. We have amended the Foreign Investment Act and also the Retail Trade Liberalization Act. So basically, we are telling to the whole world that we are opening our market for trade and investment. And yet, here you are, the Philippines, trying to restrict its participation in a globalized economy. So what kind of signal are we imparting to our stakeholders and also to our would-be investors? So again, I think this is something that I hope our policymakers, particularly the senator, should look into. If the concern, as I've explained, is on the agricultural sector, particularly on the liberalization of the market. My presentation earlier was very clear. Our market had already been liberalized by our existing FTAs. And under RCEP, if you are talking about further liberalization in agriculture, we're just talking about 33 agricultural tariff lines. And most of them are even intermediate goods and raw materials, not even final goods. And the reduction in tariff rates is very minimal. So in other words, the perceived threat is more apparent than real. It's more of perception. But more than market access, they should look also into the other areas or chapters, such as investment, e-commerce, competition, policies, among others. So there are so many aspects of trade and investment that are covered with the RCEP agreement. And lastly, almost all economists, international organizations, trading partners have been saying that this is a catalyst for economic development. One big advantage is that if we can solidify our presence here in the regions, because right now, all economic activities are centered in Asia. And when you talk about Asia, you cannot afford not to talk about Southeast Asia. We have to grab that opportunity and influence the rules of trade in the globalized economy. And I hope these are more than enough reasons for us to consider that indeed there is strong merit to participate in RCEP.
Yes. Actually, Asik Gepty, you answered also the last question already. So that's good because the last question was all about the fear of the so-called some members of the agricultural sector, but much more, I think, the organization, because there was like a report saying that RCEP faces opposition and resistance from several non-government organizations, primarily agricultural-based groups, who have been asking members of the Philippine Senate to abandon and trade the trade pact. So I think you have answered that question already. So before we go on to the last part of our program, I may ask Dr. Theresa as well to respond to the question, and Dr. Henry briefly.
This is about the affected sector, right? The agricultural
Yes.
sectors.
Yes.
Yeah, I think because the farmers are not organized in large groups, it's really quite difficult for them. So I'm wondering if local government units or private sector could empower them so that they can be stronger in terms of numbers and because of cooperation, I mean, somebody has actually floated the idea of establishing Taobao villages, Taobao type of villages in the Philippines, and get the farmers to engage in e-commerce. I think what China has done is really amazing, but before you can actually do that, you need a lot of infrastructure.
Mhm.
So I think really because the level of infrastructure is still quite low here in the Philippines, although it has progressed a lot in the last 10 years. There has to be more investment, I think, in infrastructure. If you want to sell your products, you need to transport them. And Philippines is insular. How do you solve this problem of transportation, which adds to cost, of products? So I think there are a lot of factors to be taken into account, but definitely I can see that some of the smaller groups, like farmers groups, will be affected. But there should be some solutions to that.
Yes, ma'am. Dr. Henry, yes. Do you think RCEP? We need RCEP. We need to be part of RCEP.
Yes. I'm not a bit worried now with RCEP. Of course, as Dr. Theresa Cariño has said that there might be some farmers group that are afraid that RCEP will affect if we will be bringing more of this agricultural production at a lower price. And I think we should really be competitive. And we've shown that we can be competitive. I do not know if everybody will agree with me that last year, we have the highest ever palay production in the Philippines. We used to produce around only 18 million metric tons of palay a year. We've gone to 19.1 metric tons the previous year. And then for last year, we produced 19.96 million metric tons. In fact, we are targeting more than 20 million metric tons. But I think because of the typhoon during the last two months, so we are still 19.96 million metric tons, the highest ever palay production. As what we have said now, and that's what I'm doing a Masagana 300 now. We used to do a Masagana 99 during the time of President Marcos. 99 kabans per hectare, that's Masagana 99. Farmers will be very happy. Right now, what is 99 kabans per hectare? 50 kilos, that's what? Only 5 tons per hectare, that's nothing. Right now, with hybrid price, we are producing 10, 12, 15 metric tons per hectare. No? So that's why we are doing a Masagana 300. There are a lot of farmers who already have this more than 300 kabans per hectare. And with this, we're able to reduce the cost of palay production from 12 pesos to less than 5 pesos per kilo, even lower than the production cost in Vietnam. So that's why there are a lot of farmers who are not complaining at the moment, even if the price of palay is depressed or whatever, because they are doing a good already profit margin. So these are technology, and as I said, I'm also helping the fisher folks trying to see how they could catch more fish. If they can catch maybe double the catch of fish every time they go out to the sea, maybe the cost will also goes down compared to the cost of gasoline or whatever diesel for the engine. So these are the things that we really have to. But miss out RCEP, that's a big no-no. I do not know whoever would be crazy enough not to join RCEP now. RCEP because all our neighbors now have preferential treatment on duties. So is Vietnam, so are the other countries now. the duties will also be lowered, and I'm hoping that our duties to Japan and to Korea can be lowered also, so that I can export my rice to these countries. And this will be good opportunities for us. And I'm looking forward. I do not know what keeping the Senate so long to ratify the RCEP, but let's see. Maybe
Yes, yes,
it's
yes,
because
sir.
of this farmers group that are trying to. But I think at the end of the day, I'm 100% sure that this will be ratified. There's no
Yes,
problem.
yes. Yes, sir. Thank you, Dr. Henry. We have limited time, so ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your attention. Thank you as well to our resource speaker for answering the questions patiently and excellently. Thank you very much, sir and ma'am. For the last part of our program, I'm sorry for other people. No, we don't have really time. It's already 4:52. For the last part of our program, let me call on the president of APCU, Mr. Jeffrey Nang, for the closing remarks. Sir Jeff, you have the floor po.
APCU Chairman, Secretary Raul Lambino, APCU Treasurer General Fernando Pase, fellow officers, trustees, and members of APCU, to our distinguished resource speakers, Attorney Allan Gepty, Dr. Theresa Chong Cariño, Dr. Henry Limbon Liong, to our official media partner for this forum, the Manila Times, to our media friends, colleagues, guests, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. There is no doubt that the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership is a groundbreaking milestone in regional economic integration and will enhance the country's trade with other RCEP members, hastening the Philippines' economic recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic. Some of the potential benefits of RCEP to countries in the developing world like the Philippines include: first, it provides a bigger export market and opportunities for foreign investments. RCEP secures market access for cheaper raw materials and intermediate goods for export and local industries. RCEP will, in great lengths, help Philippine micro, small, and medium enterprises, especially agricultural producers, avail of preferential arrangements with free trade arrangements partners. And member countries of RCEP would benefit in terms of increased trade and investments. Furthermore, RCEP represents the Philippines and other ASEAN member states with a first-time, unmatched, and extraordinary opportunity to take advantage of the vast potential and huge market it has to offer. More specifically, RCEP provides a golden opportunity for the Philippines to take advantage of having access to China's market and capital, which will soon become the world's biggest economy. Hence, members of RCEP, like the Philippines, in the long run, will definitely benefit much from it. But sadly, despite the DTI and other government agencies engaged in the negotiations of RCEP and many economic think tanks in the country's efforts to ratify RCEP before its implementation, the Senate of the Philippines has so far failed to ratify RCEP as the Senate went into recess without approving its ratification. In this regard, it is therefore necessary and incumbent for APCU and business organizations like the FFCCCII to lobby and convince the Philippine Senate to ensure and guarantee the ratification of RCEP at the soonest possible time. On this note, on behalf of APCU, I would like to congratulate and extend my sincere gratitude to 3 of our resource speakers for sharing their ideas, knowledge, and experience about this topic today. Let me express as well my gratitude to all of you who have joined and participated in this APCU forum today. Indeed, your presence and active participation have made this forum a fruitful and productive endeavor. Again, thank you and have a pleasant afternoon, everyone. See you next month for another APCU forum.
Thank you, APCO President Sir Jeffrey Nam, for that compelling closing remarks. Ladies and gentlemen, friends and colleagues, our forum has come to an end. On behalf of APCO, I would like to thank you for your participation. I would like again to express our sincere thanks to our esteemed resource speakers, ASEC Attorney Allan Gepty, Dr. Theresa, Cariño, and Dr. Henry Liong for sharing your knowledge and ideas, even your experience on this topic. I am sure all of us have learned so much from all of you. I would like as well to thank our official media partner for this forum, for this specific forum, Manila Times, for actually hosting our live stream in their official FB page. So other people can actually witness this forum and also join us through the social media platforms. Again, ladies and gentlemen, we will see you at our next APCO forum. Have a pleasant day. Stay safe and healthy. Thank you very much again for being with us. Maraming salamat po, Sir She. Thank you very much. Mabuhay po tayong lahat. Maraming salamat po.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Sir Jeff. Thank you,
Thank
Sir.
you, Anna.
Thank you, Dr. Henry. Thank you, Ma'am Theresa. Thank you, Attorney Gepty. Salamat. Opo. Thank you, everyone. Thank you. Have a pleasant day.
Maybe
Opo.
just a side comment. No? I'm not a bit worried that Senate will not yet
Yes, sir.
ratified this RCEP. No? But I think
Yes,
it's
sir.
election time and they do not want to antagonize any group. So maybe they will have to ratify this after the election, maybe, most probably.
Yes, sir.
Looking at another angle, no? Looking out of the box.
Yes, hopefully, sir, by the next Congress, sir, after the election, this RCEP will be ratified. Yes, sir.
Nobody
Hopefully
would like to antagonize anybody, any group at this point in time, definitely.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Definitely, sir. Thank you very much, everyone. Have a nice afternoon. Thank you, Ma'am
you.
Theresa. Thank you,
Thank
sir.
you.
Thank you po. Oh, wait. Raven, are you there? Before I click, thank you, everyone.